Hello and most welcome to 2023 of the H series. We will today continue what we started with in, what we were doing in 2019, Fractal Geometry by Marks-Tarlow. And last time in 2019, we start looking at how inside and outside are all inwardly and outwardly, exogenous and endogenously interpenetrating. Often here is referred to the coastline of Norway. To help us to the understanding of liminal zones as deciding what's happening or what is the working area. Normally, we are too fixated on the inside, the origin, the source. It has many names. By putting too much attention to that part, we lose the relational, important deciding factor. Where it all stems from. If you like, where it abides. And where does it abide? It inhabits the liminal zone, the in-betweeners. So when we take our eyes away from the fixity of essentialism, we can once more open up to a broader, wider understanding, a more allowing understanding, if you like, where humor, enjoyment, all those facets of reality come into play. Where they all interact and go into each other, belying the idea of impenetrability, that we are not penetratable. More closer to what is actually happening is that there is a sort of osmosis. It's a nice quote here on the top of the first column of 32. While, and this is from Terry Marks-Tarlow, while I won't claim that fractals represent a symbol at the same level that 0 and infinity do, I will assert that the system of notation ushered in by fractal geometry represents a portmanteau. A portmanteau! Embodying infinite, finite, continuous, discontinuous methods of symbolization. 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 Also pertinent here is the iteration process, where in the small you find the big and vice versa. It's a bit like William Blake, the whole world in a sandcorn, in a grain of sand. So I will continue on the second paragraph on page 32. Page 32. Page 32. As a prelude to fractals, let's consider imaginary numbers. Which appear as a vital link between complicated order, manifesting nature, and in the human mind. In the human mind. In the human mind. Discovered in the 17th century by Italian mathematician Jerome Cardano. Jerome Cardano. Imaginary numbers involve two independent or orthogonal axes, one real one imaginary, and the seemingly impossible square root of -1. As their name suggests, these numbers originally were considered entirely fanciful, even though they kept cropping up in equations of the form x squared equals -1, x squared equals -1. As often occurs with even the most seeming mathematical abstractions, unexpected practical uses are eventually found. Are eventually found. Are eventually found. Sometimes in the strangest, most apparently magical places. Magical places. Magical places. Magical places. For example, although non-Euclidean geometry was originally thought impractical and contradictory to everyday perception. Its rather strange geometry perfectly models Einstein's four-dimensional curvature. four-dimensional curvature of space-time. Generally, within mathematical equations. Within mathematical equations. The square root of -1 represents invisible, extra, or hidden dimensionality. 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 In electrical engineering, it models reversed polarities of alternating currents. Of alternating currents. Alternating currents. In Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc square. MC Hammer. Can't touch this. No, mc square. The square root of -1 represents the fourth dimension of time added to the three customary dimensions of space. Length, width, and depth. And depth. Imaginary numbers also crop up in quantum mechanics, another field spawned by Einstein's discoveries, where they capture or fail to capture immeasurable non-local aspects of electron behavior known as wave functions. Wave functions. wave functions. Jung and his followers play with the idea that imaginary numbers serve to unify inner and outer worlds. As Robertson 2000 notes, Jung mistakenly calls them transcendent numbers and names a corresponding psychological function, the transcendent function. The transcendent function. After them. After them. After them. Jung interprets real and imaginary aspects of the complex plane in terms of the union of conscious and unconscious contents of the psyche, This union for Jung constitutes the essence of individuation, the process by which we come most fully into ourselves. Into ourselves. Excuse me. During individuation, the little self of the conscious ego aligns and balances with the big self of the unconscious whole. Of the unconscious whole. The part of the known coincides with the whole of the unknown. With the unknown. With the unknown. What can you say? What can you do? Is there even something that you can infer? Not too briskly and not too clever. In between. Let us see. Let us see. Mindel upholds imaginary numbers to represent qualitative, subjective aspects of experience, or what he calls non-consensual reality. Non-consensual reality. His thinking influenced by Wolfgang Pauli. Wolfgang Pauli. A physicist whose psychoanalysis also inspired Jung. They had a large correspondence as well between Heisenberg and Jung. There were a massive exchange of ideas. Pauli's most famous dream involved an inner music teacher who conceptualized imaginary numbers as the key to unifying physics and psychology. Psychology, physics and psychology. Geometrically, by signifying a phase shift of 90 degrees in the complex plane to represent orthogonal dimensions. Kaufman characterizes I as the most primal distinction in the observer, that in between the imagined and the real. Generally, it appears that those artificially constructed fictions called complex numbers, which possesses both a real, and an imaginary component. Imaginary component. What is that imaginary? Tend to emerge in the very same self-reflexive places where the observer is increasingly detectable within the observed. Within the observed. Fractal geometry. If you like fractals, it is because you are made of them. If you can't stand fractals, it is because you can't stand yourself. It happens. Homer Smith. Fractal geometry represents the full mathematical fruition of the fourth stage of self-reflexive consciousness. Where imaginary numbers are concrete concretized in nature simultaneously to co-create world and self. World and self. World and self. World and self. Computer-generated fractals provide one of the most successful tools ever discovered, invented for simulating highly complex forms in nature. In nature. In nature. In nature. With fractals comes the cyber-semiotic recognition of how the infinite becomes finitely embodied in nature. Finitely embodied in nature. In nature. In nature. In nature. When the computer is used as a microscope on the complex plane to zoom in on ever smaller scales of nonlinear Mandelbrot set. Iteration, remember iteration, exhibits unceasing complexity, shifting dynamically with the perspective of the observed. Of the observed. with the perspective of the observer. This is illustrated in the Mandelbrot zoom within figure 5. Within figure 5. Where each box represents a magnification of a small area within the previous box. Within the previous box. Within the previous box. The benchmark of fractals is self-similarity, a newly discovered self-reflexive asymmetry in which parts of a fractal object resemble the whole. The whole. Sometimes this resemblance is approximate and statistical. As in the case with the nonlinear Mandelbrot set. The nonlinear Mandelbrot set. Other times, self-similarity is exact, such as with linear fractals. Linear fractals! Figure 6 illustrates a linear fractal called the Koch snowflake. The Koch snowflake. The Koch snowflake. The Koch snowflake.
In this figure, we easily see how each iteration brings greater complexity, while the area within the snowflake remains finitely bounded. The edges of the Koch curve grew infinitely complex. Whether we consider the linear or non-linear variety of fractal, not only is their whole greater than the sum of its parts, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The hallmark of organic. The hallmark of organic as compared to purely mechanistic systems. But listen now, the whole is also paradoxically embodied within the very parts themselves. So, in a grain of sand, the whole world. This is also called the scaleless universe. Defying and not having scale. To be scaleless. Something that we previously have pointed to when it comes to Julian Barber. Julian Barber. Julian Barber. The universe, and I think is also called the block universe or the shape universe.
The scalelessness is an intrinsic property of everything. And all small things will be depicted in the whole, in everything. This is quite opposed to how we normally see things, with this very sharp from bottom to top. This is slowly, little by little, eroding that idea and bringing a quite more expansive, enticing, and invigorating viewpoint. Making everything larger, bigger, more understandable, more encompassing. I would end this lecture at 2023 here. We are currently at page 33. And I'll go for some quotes. Quotes. What should we quote here? We had a lot to quote. So let's go to page 32. So here we get introduced with the imaginary numbers. Something that I came across earlier as an electrical engineer. It is impossible to understand what imaginary means in this fixated idea of existences, because this is really a non-existence. But with the help of it, you can understand how currents flow. It is a necessity. And what the author, Terry Marks-Tarlow, is pointing to here is the necessity for the imagined, the creative, the fantasy, for understanding, for bringing forth understanding. To extend understanding. Usually we are so fixated on everything coming from the little, the atom. This is an incredibly limiting view. Not at all the working of the true universe. So this is opening up, and it also shows the most pertinent relation between the small iterations, the infinitesimals, small things that are actually related to the larger or the totality. of everything. If you go to the second column and the second paragraph at the very end, the last sentence there, the part of the known coincides with the whole of the unknown. The whole of the unknown. And this is also Quantum Relation by Carlo Rovelli. Carlo Rovelli. It's a widening of understanding. By this enlargement of this expansion of understanding into the small, up to the large. And do remember Alan Specht, John Claus, Anton Seilinger and John Clauser, how they show that it is the totality of all relations in the whole of the universe that decides difference, singularity, properties, even what a relation is. Can you understand that? Something that Augustine would never admit it to, of course, but the actual pointing thing. So the actual pointing thing itself is a part of parcel of what comes from all the global relations. It's an absolute necessity to any understanding whatsoever. If we go to the next page, we go to fractal geometry. The first column, second paragraph. Fractal geometry represents the full mathematical fruition of the fourth stage of self-reflexive consciousness, where imaginary numbers are concretized in nature simultaneously to co-create world and self. To co-create world and self. So the observer, we, and the outside are never disjunct. They are closely interwoven. But this does not defy them being different. It does not take away the possibility of absolute singularity or absolute properties or whatever you'd like. It is still there, even stronger so. At the end of that paragraph, or end of that column, because it doesn't end there, 3 lines from the bottom, you have a magnificent Mandelbrot set. And the computer itself, isn't that fascinating? The computer is a magnifying microscope. Your thinking is as well a magnifying microscope or amplifying, enlarging telescope. And by going over the dimensions of everyday life or your whole life, you will come to understanding. It is this fluctuating over the distance between the different sizes that is entering into the world. You, so to speak, you go up and you go down. You're not staying in the orthogonal perpendicular dimensions of Descartes or Newton. No. It's this levering going up and going down, which is moving about in reality, being real, existing, doing things. Acquiring measures. And it's pretty great. I really like these last words on the second column, page 33. But the whole is also paradoxically embodied within the very parts themselves. Look at the Mandelbrot set as depicted on page 33. For each zooming in, you also get the totality of everything. This goes for time, as we looked earlier on with Susie Frobel. It is definitely with space, but also with knowledge. This is the working process of knowledge itself. It can zoom in and it can zoom out, encompassing the very smallest and all of it. This is indeed very different from the regular idea of generality as a collection of atoms, or the generalizations that we mentioned in the previous recording, 2019, that could lead to prejudice and such. No, you find in the littlest, the smallest parts, the totality. This is scale independency. And this is how the universe is working. This will further your understanding. Let even more of properties, knowledge come into your life when you re-enter as an observer. Isn't that great? I end here. Let's see. Thank you very much for participating. Have a very beautiful morning, day, or afternoon, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.